Jill Vialet of Playworks with us. So Jill Vialet has worked for more than 25 years in the nonprofit sector, during which she has focused her entrepreneurial skills on founding and growing 2 successful nonprofit organizations. In 1996, Vialet launched Playworks with 2 schools in Berkeley, California. Currently, the organization brings play and physical activities to children across the country with offices in 24 cities. During the 2014-2015 school year, Playworks will serve over 600,000 students through direct and training services, reaching more than 1,000 schools and youth-serving organizations. Prior to Playworks, Vialet founded the Museum of Children's Art, MoCA, in Oakland, California. She served as the executive director at MoCA for 9 years, ultimately expanding its program to reach over 20,000 young people each year. I'm proud to introduce Jill Vialet. Thank you.
Great. So I thought we'd start with a game, and the game is called Stand Up. And so you know a little bit about me. Those guys, overachievers, sit back down. Down. And the game is called Stand Up. And so the way with little kids, I call it I Love My Neighbor. With teenagers, we call it Move Your Butt. But with grown-ups, I find it best just to say stand up. And so I'm going to make a series of statements. And if that statement is true for you, you're going to stand up. Just pause for a moment. You can check out who amongst your peers is also standing. Then you sit back down. We'll get a flow going up and down. And if for some reason standing up is not working for you, you can just make an upward sweeping gesture with your arms to signal your inclusion in the statement. 2 thumbs up if you understand. Right on. So if you are an undergraduate, stand up. All right, sit back down. If you are a business school student, stand up. All right, sit back down. If you are from another graduate school other than the business school, stand up. Sit back down. If you just wandered in off the street, stand up. Okay, perfect. If you have ever run a marathon, stand up. It's a good week for you all. Thank you. That's good. If you have already exercised today, stand up. Don't hate other people. That's good. Sit back down. If you are a vegan, stand up. Vegan free. I'm surprised by that. All right. If you are left-handed, stand up. All right. If you regularly volunteer with a nonprofit organization, stand up. All right. Sit back down. If you've ever been in a musical, stand up. Come on, no shame. No, thank you. I appreciate the upward sweeping gesture. Thank you. Keep going. Watch, if we wait a little longer, there's someone who's holding out. Ah, see, there we go. Thank you very much. You back down. We're good? And this is a free choice. You don't have to sort of self-identify if you don't want to. But so if you have any Justin Timberlake on your MP3 player or iPod or other music listening device, thank you. Bringing sexy back. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's good. If you are considering a career in nonprofits as your kind of next step, stand up. All right. Sit back down. If you are considering a career in teaching, stand up. All right. One last one. If you have ever been to a Grateful Dead show, are you all too young? Is that really, have we officially passed that because Jerry was dead? That's what I thought. All right, I'm going to get one. That can't be my last one because that's just too much of a bad way to end. If you've ever seen Justin Bieber in concert, stand up. I love you. Thank you very much. Excellent. That was really satisfying. Thank you. All right. So I run a national nonprofit called Playworks, and there's more information on Playworks at www.playworks.org. And I like to start with a game because one of our key insights is that play is this really transformative experience that actually, and we know actually from the brain research that while people are playing, that it actually involves a shift in the parts of the brain that you are using. When they do MRIs of jazz musicians improvising, the brain activity is very comparable to that. It's a state of mind which is conducive to sort of flexibility, spontaneity, creativity. It's a very ripe state of mind for learning. That being said, what we also know is that if you are to go out to one of these 60,000 public elementary schools in our country, it is rare to see a classroom where there is actually play happening. That the model that was true for my parents and their parents before them of a more didactic, someone stands in front of the classroom and drops knowledge on the class with sort of a focus on knowledge acquisition as contrasted with learning, still tends to be the dominant way that we do education in this country, especially in public primary schools. Playworks really has come about, and our goal, and what I want to talk about today, is the idea that we don't exist just to build the biggest possible Playworks. My idea in starting Playworks is to really try and change the myriad educational systems that are operating in our country to make them places where kids really can thrive, to really leverage the power of play to bring out the best in every kid. And in doing that, to really be part of a larger movement that raises all sorts of important questions about what it means to bring out the best in every kid. What actually do we as a society believe when we talk about the best in every kid? Because it sounds like this very trite, throwaway idea, but really, for me, when I talk about the best in every kid, I'm hoping to raise the possibility that out there in the East Palo Alto schools, or in the Detroit schools, or in the Oakland schools, or the Salt Lake City schools, or all the various places that we work, there is that possibility that out in those schools is the next surgeon or doctor who's going to discover a cure for cancer, researcher who will discover that, or the next poet laureate, or the next great leader of a social movement that will really help the arc of history move closer towards justice. So in thinking about the best in every kid in that way, and coming at it from the sort of surprising root of play, we also raise all sorts of other questions about to what end? Like, if you're going to engage in education reform, why are you doing it? And for me, the question, you almost get to a place of saying, for whose benefit? Why would you bother to really fix schools? Is it for the kids themselves? Is it so that they can get a wage-earning job? Or do you believe something more aspirational, that they are these great leaders of tomorrow? In which case, the nature of our investment really sort of shifts radically, right? If we are building amazing schools where kids really feel seen and heard, and like we as the grown-ups who are running them believe that the best in them is really knock it out of the park amazing, then the nature of the investment is very different from a school where you are kind of believing, well, maybe they'll get to graduate, and maybe they'll get a wage-earning job, and that would be great for them. If you really actually believe that all of us as a society benefit from educating our kids, my belief is that you thus, in doing that, choose a very different course of action. Now, you can imagine being the leader of a national nonprofit that's focused on recess. This is sort of an unlikely path that people sort of, they hear about Playworks, and they hear about recess, and they can be a little dismissive. Oh, that's really sweet. That's really nice. And I just would sit up here and tell you, no, I'm a power-hungry bitch. And in fact, there's nothing sweet or nice about it. It's really quite revolutionary. And what we're really is at stake here is building the schools that our kids need and deserve, and frankly, the schools that will ultimately help them become the grown-ups that we so desperately need them to become. So I offer that as an opening sort of idea about what we do. So I'll talk a little bit about my trajectory as a social entrepreneur, and then I'll dig in about Playworks, and then we'll take questions, and maybe I'll throw in another game before we're done, too. So I went to Harvard. I grew up on the East Coast. I should ask that. Anybody from the East Coast? Thank you. My daughter, I have 5 kids between the ages of 10 and 18, and my oldest is going off to NYU, and I must tell you, as a mom, sending one's child off to the village seems like a really sketchy idea. but I'm good. I'm solid. So, my roots are on the East Coast, and I grew up in Washington D.C. and I'll be 50 this summer. And so I am that generation of women who grew up benefiting from Title IX. But still, when I was growing up, I was often the only little girl playing. And I often tell a story about how when I was a kid, we played outside all the time, unsupervised. And I think actually my childhood experience and the contrast between my experience as a kid and my children's experience growing up is very informative as to why we have the crisis in play that we have in schools today. My childhood involved being outside, playing all the time in these very mixed age groups of kids. There were these 3 older kids in the neighborhood, and I remember their first and last names the way you only remember from when you're like 8. You know how everybody had first and last names? No one I know now has a last name, but first and last names very big when I was a kid. And Daniel Mintz, Jeffrey Schwartz, and Amy Hanks, and they were the older kids in the neighborhood. And they basically ran the place. They taught us the rules to all the games we played. They taught us how to do rock, paper, scissors if we disagreed. They taught us how if you were playing a game and the teams were really uneven, like Jill and Jeff, you switch sides to even out the teams, that kind of self-handicapping, which is actually, if you think about it, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds doing that, it's a pretty nuanced concept. And I often joke that if you watch our current economic reality, that we seem to have, as a society, lost our ability to self-handicap in some ways that seem like they have sort of devastating implications. But this idea that, and frankly, John Dewey wrote about it 100 years ago when he was writing about his basic treatises on education. It is this distinction between formal education and informal education. And Dewey wrote about how informal education, which is the mixed age, out of classroom time, ways that communities have always taught their newest members sort of the mores of the group, how you get along, what are the expectations of the rest of the group that really make civilization and civil society function. Dewey predicted 100 years ago that as we got more focused on formal education, the sort of age-specific, more technical, more formalized, in-class kind of learning, that shift to that formal education would come at the expense of informal education. And I would say that I think that has actually come to pass. That if you look at what's going on out in the schools today and out in the world today, kids have far fewer opportunities to play in unsupervised groups. I personally resist calling them unstructured. That childhood play experience that I had with Jeff and Amy and Daniel, I think was among the most structured experiences I've ever had as a human. But it was unsupervised, and we did some sketchy things, like they used to pry up the tops of the DC sewer system, and we would climb down in there. And so it wasn't, I don't mean to paint it as all kind of, halcyon days of, everyone was really super sweet to each other and we made good choices. We made some really worrisome decisions. And as a mom, I'm not advocating that. And yet, when I left for college, I'd had a fair measure of independence over my childhood. And I think I was probably a little more prepared for dealing with the sort of unknown that would come up as I was facing adulthood. And I worry, frankly, and others have worried as well about what it means for young people today coming up without ever having those unsupervised experiences. It's an interesting phenomenon, too, currently, because it crosses socioeconomic lines. So with more affluent kids, they're not having these sort of unsupervised experiences because they're going from one sort of structured activity to another, from lessons to soccer practice. But for more low-income kids, real concerns about neighborhood safety mean they're coming inside. So it's interesting. There's a lot of talk about after-school programming, but right now in America, only 17% of kids really actively participate in after-school programs. So for me, when thinking about designing an intervention that was going to really affect the broadest swath of kids, the school day really created the greatest opportunity. So I grew up in DC, loved playing everything, ended up going to Harvard and played on the women's, I played rugby internationally, super competitive. For those of you who are considering going into a nonprofit career, really knocking people down after work, highly, highly effective as far as mitigating sort of levels of stress and fundraising anxiety. I can't recommend it enough. but loved playing sports and always really felt like it was part of who I am. And as a grown-up successfully navigating the business world, I've found that a lot of what I learned, both playing outside in unstructured, unsupervised activities, but also playing college level sports and competitive sports after that, I think it has really taught me a lot about when to pass the ball, when to shine. A lot of things that sound super cliche, but I actually really genuinely do think they've made a difference in my career, especially I think as a woman navigating a business world. After college, during college, let's see, when I was at Harvard, I mentioned I'm turning 50 this summer, so that puts me in a certain time frame. I was super involved with the divestiture movement in college. I wrote my thesis on reproductive health care in South Africa. And I got a grant from the African Studies Department at Harvard to go over to South Africa in '86 under apartheid and to look at Berghoff Hospital outside of Cape Town. And I did sort of I'm not a Marxist, but I did sort of a Marxist feminist tract on how politics, economics, and religion had an impact on women's access to prenatal, postnatal, reproductive, contraceptive and abortion in South Africa. And it was a really actually very profound experience for me. I grew up with just a sense of discrimination and how it could be systematic. And I must admit, going over to South Africa and being there and just seeing it so entrenched was really, it kind of at that point in my life really left me feeling a little shaken and a little bit like being kicked in the stomach. And it was the first time that I'd really come across a system that felt so entrenched and so, I felt so powerless in the face of it. And it was a very important time for me, but it was hard. It sort of took I think I was 20 at the time, and I think I thought I could do anything. And I think that was the first time I came away feeling like, oh, maybe not. And, in retrospect, it feels like that was extraordinarily useful and lucky. And I learned a lot. And I'll come back to that in a bit. But I moved to the Bay Area. So then I got back from doing the South Africa stuff. And my first job where I got paid out of college was teaching Eskimo kids how to swim in Alaska along the Kuskokwim River. And I don't know, for those of you who are undergraduates, if any of you are seniors, spring rolls around and people start the job thing, I found completely harrowing. Like, I was like, what? And they wanted me to wear shoes to interviews, and the whole thing I thought was just completely screwy. And all my friends were going off to do the interviews with Bain and all the McKinsey and the Goldmans and all the same ones that, maybe Lehman was still around then, but not now. But, in general, all the same ones that are coming here to do interviews. And I just could not get myself to go off and do them. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was completely freaked out. And then Campfire Boys and Girls was interviewing for this summer job where they flew you in and out of villages to teach Eskimo kids how to swim. And much to my parents' complete horror, that was the one job interview that I went to. And I got it, psych, awesome. So I did that for a summer, and then it started to get dark. And so having grown up on the East Coast, and it was 86, 87, terrible time to be looking for a job, right? And so my options were either go home and sleep on my parents' couch or to go to Berkeley, California and sleep on my college roommate's couch. So much better, I was like, so that's how I ended up on this coast. I was on my college roommate's parents' couch in Berkeley, California. And in some ways, I sort of never left. I left the couch, but I didn't leave the Bay Area. And I fell in love with being here and got a job. I worked for 10 months as a stockbroker doing socially responsible investing. It was this amazing guy, Peter Camejo. You might have heard his name. He was the Green candidate, vice presidential candidate under Ralph Nader. And he was completely crazy as a loon and wonderful. And he had written with this guy, John Harrington, California's laws around socially responsible investing back in the day. And I did this very Kramer-esque thing where they didn't want to hire me, and I would just go to the office every day And I would just wait in the lobby and, say, is there anything I can do to help? If there's, and like I couldn't get a job. So I was like, it kept me off the streets. And I would go there every day. And then finally they broke down and hired me. And which I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's an episode in Seinfeld where Kramer does a very similar thing. And then he quits. And, you can't quit. We haven't ever hired you. But anyway, so they did, in fact, hire me. And I got my Series 7. I became a licensed stockbroker, which for my friends continues to be a source of great humor and amusement. And I did it for all of 10 months and really just could not stand it. And while I was there, so I'm now at the wizened age of 23, I wrote the business plan for the Museum of Children's Art. And I quit my job 10 months into the stockbroker thing. I was doing divestiture work for a bunch of nuns. And I thought, this is not how I want to spend the rest of my life. They're very nice nuns, but tracing certificates of deposit and how they stem back to South Africa is not for me. And so I wrote the business plan for MoCA, and I quit my job, and I started answering the phone in my kitchen. Hi, Museum of Children's Art. And it was a great time because that's not me. I'm so glad it's not my phone. Has anybody ever heard of Title IX Sports, the women's mail order sporting good catalog? Yeah, so I appreciate you have. Not that you're buying a lot of women's sporting goods, but nonetheless. Missy Park had been my JV college my basketball coach in college. And so she was starting Title IX in the garage, and I was starting MoCA in the kitchen. So it was very entrepreneurial. And I just throw that out because really I think starting a business is starting a business, whether you're starting a for-profit or a nonprofit. And those early days were so much fun. I'm 23. I was working a bunch of night jobs. I worked at the Berkeley sauna, folding towels and chasing away lechy guys who shouldn't have been there, thinking there was some other services at the Berkeley sauna. And I worked at the North Face doing data entry. And I had like all these great jobs. And I didn't have a car. I had a bike. And Missy, meanwhile, was starting the mail order catalog. And it was just a very exciting time. And also, I got to tell you, back then with MoCA, it's only 1988 at this point, so it's very much the wild, wild west. Like there wasn't a census. This kind of a group was not even anybody, never even heard of it, right? So the folks at Michael Brown and Alan Casey were just getting City Year going. Wendy Kopp was writing her thesis on the possibility of Teach for America. So there weren't any rules yet, and so it was a very exciting time. So I started MoCA with, I walked my way into the Children's Hospital Oakland Child Life Department, and I convinced them to give me their budget for hanging art in the cafeteria to spend on hiring artists to work with kids in the oncology ward. That was the very beginning. I didn't get paid for the first year and a half, so I continued working lots of other jobs and part-time. And then also we got our first grant. And I will tell you, I think the first grant was $15,000 to start MoCA from the SCAG Foundation, which no longer exists. But that first grant, that $10,000, so by way of contrast, Playworks currently is a $33 million annual budget, but there is nothing like convincing someone to give you, which just seemed like so much money, $10,000 to do your dream. It is a feeling of elation that it was like winning the lottery. It was really incredible. And so built MoCA up and ran that for 9 years and learned just a huge amount. And I will tell you that I remember thinking when I ended up leaving MoCA to go start Playworks, and at the time I was pregnant with my oldest daughter. So Playworks and Caitlin are the exact same age. And I will just tell you that first off, people are like, really, you started something when you were pregnant? That's such a dubious idea. But it was a great idea, actually. It really worked well. I will just say, and I say this knowing, and I will foreshadowing that I was completely wrong. I remember thinking, God, I can't believe people ever go to business school. Why would you need that? You just start something and then you learn so much. I just remember thinking that was just such a dumb thing to do. And I will tell you later that I was completely wrong. But it was, at the time, so I got Playworks going, and it was easier the second time around. And I also think it was easier getting Playworks going because we very quickly found that while educators really cared about having arts in the schools, and MoCA is still alive and well, Playworks had this opportunity for success that I think was really predicated on the fact that principals have a pain point around recess. That the thing, while I care in a very big picture, as I started off by telling you about what's possible if we focus on the power of play to bring out the best in every kid, and this very aspirational vision, the reality is with my business model, we're selling a cost-effective solution to a lot of principals' group management problem at lunchtime and recess. And I think building a business where you know what the value proposition is for your customer, as well as for your investor, and there are both in the equation, even when you're a nonprofit, that's really critical. And so understanding that, I think one of the reasons that Playworks has been able to scale as effectively as it has is because of the way our primary customer, relates to what we do. So we started in 2 schools in Berkeley back in '96 with Playworks, and it really grew so quickly. So we pretty much every year just had this very exponential growth. And so currently we have offices. You mentioned that we have offices in 24 cities across the country. We have a staff of 600 people full time, and we have 2 main parts to our business. The first is we have a direct service model where we hire amazing, earnest young adults, and we train them till they beg for mercy, and then we send them 1 per low-income urban public elementary school. And they are there from the very first day of the school year. In some places, that's like August 7, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. And they are there until the last day of the school year, sometime usually in June. And the program has 5 parts to it, but I should say, and again, getting to that sort of very business focus, we are very mission driven, and we know that our North Star, the way that Southwest Airlines' North Star is being the low-cost airline, our North Star is recess. So at every school where we go, recess is the key thing that we do. But in support of making recess great, we have these 4 other components. So one is an out-of-school time program, which we do both before school and after school. Before school, our staff will get there, they'll run a recess before school actually starts. And it's a huge boon, especially for schools that have free breakfast programs, because our coaches are like rock stars, right? So kids want to get there and they want to play with our coach. And if, I don't know, for those of you who exercise and are physically active, I know for me, if I actually run or do something before work, I'm that much more alert and attentive. And the research is pretty categorical that this is true for kids too, that if they get to be physically active before school starts, it really has a positive impact on their ability to learn. So we do out-of-school time, so both before school and after school. We're there at the recess, I mentioned that, and then we work with classroom teachers to bring the kids out for classroom game time. So it's a play-based physical activity, and it works in small groups so we can teach kids the rules to the games. A lot of what we see out in elementary schools is a lot of posturing, like, I know the rule of that game, and they talk smack, but they don't actually really know how to play the games, because when would they know? They're not playing after school, out of school, they're not playing the weekends, so there's not really as much of a chance to learn the rules to games as there used to be. So we teach them the rules to games. We then have a junior coach program, which is we basically identify between like 15 and 20 leaders in the school, and by leader we are very inclusive. So my underlying belief about why our program works so well is not that my staff go in and make all these changes happen. My staff go in and they create an environment which unlocks the kids' superpowers. And so we know that all those kids, getting back to that idea about the best in every kid, we believe deeply in the superpowers of all the kids out in the schools. The reality is, though, some of the kids are using their superpowers for good and some not so much, right? So we're really interested in those kids who have natural leadership abilities, but they're sort of leading astray, and we bring them back into the fold. And we give them an opportunity to be incredibly successful and to get positive reinforcement. And it totally works. What you see is that in the average recess, in the average schoolyard, there are a couple of kids generally who are causing a lot of the problems. And if you win them over, if you put them in charge of distributing equipment and pitching the kickball and turning the rope and making sure that everyone else is using rock, paper, scissors to resolve conflicts, you can just do an incredible job of reducing the conflicts that happen out on the schoolyard at lunchtime and recess. So then besides that, we have out of school time, recess, junior coach, classroom game time, and then the final piece is we introduce competition with interscholastic leagues. And so that's basically different Playworks schools will play against each other. We started off, actually, the inspiration for getting that going was when I was an undergraduate. I had a class with a professor named Carol Gilligan. And Professor Gilligan wrote a book called In a Different Voice, which is a really fascinating study about boys and girls and how they learn. And the basic thesis of it is that boys are actually really driven by the activity itself, whereas girls are much more drawn to activities based on the cohort participating. So what we were seeing out in the schoolyard was that the boys, it didn't matter if our staff person was male or female, boys were much more likely to avail themselves of playing with this grown person who was there to play with them, whereas the girls were much more skeptical. And so we started the girls' basketball league sort of as a minor social experiment to see, could we get the girls to participate in recess activities in the context of their basketball playing cohort? And sure enough, we found that it was almost immediate, that girls who had never shown any interest in kickball or foursquare before in the recess yard, once the coach had talked them into being involved with the girls' basketball league, we could then, as a group, get them to go experiment with playing new games and to participate. And then what's really fascinating is you can really then build a culture at the school of expectation around that, where the kindergarten girls are coming up and all they're knowing is that the 4th and 5th grade girls who play basketball are participating in these different sports. And it was just a fascinating social experiment in how you change patterns. We also, along the way, realized that it was an incredible opportunity for engaging families in our work. That we were seeing out in our schools a lot of family members who loved their kids and really wanted to be involved, but didn't necessarily have a great history with the schools. They didn't feel connected to it. They didn't feel like they could go in and help at the classroom, but to plug in, helping out at recess, or to show up and cheer. And that was something that really felt accessible. And we had all these very funny interactions with principals who were like, oh my God, I never get any parents to come to the PTA meetings, but you're packing the gym for these leagues. And so that became a sort of tool in community organizing and community building, and also just figuring out how you really leverage play to really build the schools you really want and need. The other thing, we've also experimented using that sort of magnet that is sports and play to really work with the families around teaching them good sporting behavior. There's a really great Stanford affiliated program, Positive Coaching Alliance. Jim Thompson was here at the business school and then left, and is now PCA. It's down here in Palo Alto, and it's based in Menlo Park, but it got its sort of legs here at Stanford. And paying attention to coaching and how grown-ups support kids, it's a really important thing, I think, to do in terms of really maximizing sports and play as a tool for building a great society. And it's easy to not do it. It's easy to look away. And it's the whole experience of running these leagues all across the country now. That people will come and they'll cheer, and all the models they've seen for how you interact with sports are pretty intense. And so they'll boo and they'll yell and they'll say miss and things like that. And we're very playful and loving and kind to everyone who participates in any way with Playworks programs. So we always point out, hey, everyone's 10 who's playing. Yelling miss makes no sense whatsoever, and we make games up, and we start every game by reminding people of the rules. And it is striking how when you remind people, when you engage them, when you summon their better selves, and that people are totally open to it. And people tell us all the time that they really love the way the Playworks games feel, and they really look forward to it and people sit together. They don't have the one side sitting with the other. It's much more community building, and I actually think it's a very hopeful, great opportunity. So that's in sum kind of what we would do with our direct service program. And this year we're in 382 schools full-time. Next year we'll be in 450 schools across the country. I will say before I describe our training business, we also are super data-driven, and I take a lot of pride, and I take it very seriously running a business that is well run, a very professional business. We talk a lot about wanting to take the work very seriously, but not take ourselves too seriously, which feels appropriate for a group that works on recess. So we use data a lot. We use Salesforce to manage data all throughout the organization. We're using adaptive planning for our budgeting, which I think was also started by a Stanford alum. It's a really amazing multi-site budgeting program, which I highly recommend if you were thinking about building a business. We use Google for all our apps, voice, and we have a very lean, very high-tech, very effective and efficient machine. And we rely a lot on data for making decisions about how our training's rolling out with our staff, program elements. We do a lot of piloting of innovation around trying new things, but given that we have these 24 offices, with these different regions all across the country, it provides a really great testing ground for new ideas. We did do a randomized control trial 2 years ago. It was conducted Stanford, the folks at the Gardner Center, Milburn McLaughlin was the PI, and then Mathematica Policy Research. And they basically looked at 29 schools across the country, 17 that had Playworks and 12 that didn't. Randomized control trial, for those of you not super into the evaluation world, is sort of the gold standard. It was a $2 million study, and basically over the 2 years, they really dug in deep. And what's intense about an RCT is that it has this very rigorous standard for seeing statistical significance in the differences between the schools that have the intervention as opposed to those that don't. And so you always kind of worry, especially if you're sort of frugal like me, and spending $2 million just felt like, do you know how many kids' recess I could do with $2 million? But luckily and happily, they found 4 really significant statistical findings. The first, and the one that got the biggest buzz from the media, was that teachers at Playworks schools rated bullying 43% lower than the non-Playworks schools. And that was among the biggest findings ever documented in an RCT around reducing bullying. And what's striking about that, just worth noting, is that not that we had an impact on bullying, but that we had such a magnitude of impact on bullying, especially going, ours is not a targeted intervention. We go in and we serve the whole school. It's a universal intervention. It's a school-wide student engagement strategy. And our impact on bullying was equal to or greater than a lot of programs that had this targeted intervention where they were specifically focusing on kids who'd either been engaging in bullying activities or had been bullied. And so it's striking to think that if you're really going to scale an idea, how do you decide between a universal intervention versus a targeted intervention? And in the sector, it's not controversial, but people feel strongly one way or the other. There are a lot of funders and a lot of folks who run programs who feel like targeted interventions are the most efficient way to make change. And then there are those of us on the other side of the aisle who really feel like student engagement strategies, universal interventions, are actually a much more natural and important kind of idea to scale. And I'll make one analogy and then I'll get back to the RCT. When we had that finding, the woman who's in charge of evaluation for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who's our biggest funder, I went to her and I was talking about, like, why do you think we had such a big impact? And her analogy from a public health standpoint I thought was fascinating. She said, look, in public health, you have primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions, right? So if you use a seatbelt as the analogy, the primary intervention for the seatbelt is the fact that seatbelts are even installed in the car. And the secondary intervention for seatbelts is that you do a big media campaign, like, don't fly out the window, buckle your belts, whatever, something more catchy than that. And then the third intervention, the tertiary intervention, right, is that it's the targeted intervention. It's that you ticket, you punish people who are driving around in the car without the seatbelt on. And Laura's perspective on this was, in a lot of ways, when you look at education reform, we just jump right to that tertiary intervention. You go right to the targeted thing where, in point of fact, you haven't actually laid the necessary groundwork. And really, if you take that to the logical extension, what she's saying is, if you're like with a bullying approach or with an obesity approach, if you're going to punish kids for bullying, in some ways, without having ever done the primary or secondary interventions, it's a little bit analogous to giving somebody a ticket for driving around in a car without a seatbelt on when the seatbelts haven't even yet been installed. And so if you think about our intervention as the sort of essential precursor, the fundamental way that you teach kids, that you norm behaviors that allow them to figure out how to get along well, that really express our really intense, value on leading with empathy and inclusion and teamwork and leadership, and that they have grown-ups to look up to who are doing this and who value this. You can see how doing that first feels like fundamental to being successful, to discouraging kids from bullying in other ways. The other findings were we saw a statistically significant increase in kids' sense of safety, not just at recess, but throughout the school day. And you can imagine that just with anything, feeling safe is a absolutely essential foundation for being able to learn. They found that we recovered a significant amount of vigorous physical activity, which really, if it was a pill, physical activity would be it would outpace Viagra as this incredible pharmaceutical, right? Physical activity is just amazingly good for us, social, emotional, physical, all of it. And then the final one, and this was the financial argument that has been really important for us. We found that at Playworks schools, we were recovering a really significant amount of instructional time. And it's very common sense, right? If kids are going out and they're having this great experience running around, and they're not having all these conflicts that then follow them back into the classroom, they're much more able to learn. And in fact, classroom teachers are able to get right down to the business of teaching because they're not spending all that unnecessary time resolving unresolved conflicts or helping kids feel better or doing all the things that sort of a yucky recess leads to. In fact, the amount of recovered instructional time is about 6 minutes per class per day at Playworks schools, which is huge, really. And in the aggregate, it's about 20 hours of instructional time. And if you're going to monetize anything in an elementary school, it's instructional time. That's what we as taxpayers are paying for. And so that 20 hours works out to be about a 200% return on the cost of the program, which is hugely important because, I started off by saying, being the person out there jumping up and down about the importance of recess and play in schools, the current narrative about how we're going to fix schools doesn't really, not a lot of it has a lot of emphasis on play and recreation as sort of a key way that we're going to make the change. There's much more of a mindset around butts and seats and, more testing and more rigor, and so giving the educators and the administrators the political cover to really justify working with us has been a huge, big deal. Okay, I've been babbling for a really significant amount of time, recklessly caffeinated. So I can stop. I have more to say, but I also, if there are questions, I could also jump in here and we could do some questions for a little bit. Yeah? Go for it. Sure. So what's really been interesting about scaling is that over the period of time, it's really changed radically. So when we first started to experiment with going outside of California, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation made a big investment in us to test the model in 3 cities outside of California. And I was invited to go back to Johns Hopkins to give a talk, and so I brought some staff with me. And we went out and just did a bunch of interviews and meetings with principals to hear about what was going on for them. In fact, in Baltimore at the time, there were a number of elementary schools that weren't offering recess at all. And so generally speaking, back then, and we still do it now, we would come in and we'd do a demonstration week we call a recess rollout. So we would bring 6 of our current staff. In fact, we're doing it that first May 5th to 9th, we'll be in Atlanta, Georgia, doing a recess rollout week because that's our newest expansion city. And the staff model the program for a week in the schools, and so it gives the principals a chance to see it in action, to see what a huge difference it can make so quickly. And the other piece about that that's been hugely valuable has been scaling is not for the faint of heart. Bigger isn't just bigger, it's really different, and it's hard on an organization. And so engaging the whole staff in the expansion process has been just critical to sort of morale and internal buy-in around continuing to grow and shift. What we found we had a whole expansion team for a while because we went from being in the 3 cities to being in 5 cities to then we added 2 and then 4 and then 1 year we added 10 cities. So that's how we chose to go. It's like the ripping the Band-Aid off approach to scale. We went big because if you sort of stop in the middle, it's sort of easy to lose momentum. So we did a lot, and now we're adding, and it was very much a push strategy because we had funding from RWJ. So if we could go out there and we'd tell principals about what we did, and overwhelmingly, when principals hear about what we do, they get it immediately because recess can be a pain point for them. But then there's a process of building the local traction. Now, in all of our cities where we've had a presence for 4 years or more, there's a waiting list for our program. And it does cost. Schools pay anywhere between $25,000 and $32,000 a year to have the program. But in newer cities, it's still a process of getting being identified. And principals talk a lot, and they share best practices. So that's a wide-ranging answer to that question. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about what are your thoughts on online education, and do you see online education ever replacing the physical schools?
No. So, I'm not a Luddite. I definitely think what's happening with online and classrooms are changing, and I think everything from the flipped classroom to a greater reliance on online education has huge promise and will ultimately be really, really critical. I think there are valuable skills that are learned in the social context, learning together, learning in person, playing together. I often, in my role, get called on to sort of talk trash about video games and television, and I refuse. I think there are many forms of play, and there are great games that happen online, and there are great games that happen outside, and there are bad games that happen outside, and there are bad games that happen online. The extent to which they tap the imagination and foster creativity and foster interpersonal connection in all its myriad forms is really at the heart of what makes a great game, and I actually think that's also at the heart of what makes a great education. And so I think recognizing the partnership and ultimately creating a blended education that really uses all resources is going to be ultimately the most successful thing. But I laugh because I think people talk about blended education, and I worry that blended education is complete all online versus, and you have to blend it with something, and blending it with like a more didactic classroom where people just sit in and absorb information isn't blended enough for me either. I see it as a spectrum, and I think you need the full spectrum of experience and the full spectrum of learning. I hope that wasn't cheating as an answer. So, yeah. Sort of like saying, I believe in all things good, I'm against all things bad. Okay, so I have an idea. So as someone who starts things, my latest sort of thing I'm obsessed with, and I thought I would just throw this out to you, because mostly I'm hoping someone will steal it and actually do it, because I really don't have the time right now to do it. But I'm currently obsessed with substitute teaching. And so here's the deal. Let me throw out some numbers for you. At any moment in time, standing in front of America's classroom, 10% of the teachers are subs. On 90% of our school districts only require 4 hours or less of training for those substitute teachers. Only 30% of our states require that they have a college education to be a substitute teacher. And overwhelmingly, principals are unhappy with the quality or the availability of subs. I'm often out in schools where they couldn't get, especially with low income, it disproportionately affects low income underperforming schools, but I go out to these schools and you'll have, a teacher's out, they haven't had a sub for a long time, so the kids are divided up. So not only are those kids, their experience is being disrupted, but the other classes where they're being absorbed, they're disrupting. It's a huge big deal. And then the last part is that the subs themselves are just woefully unhappy with the experience, right? They're not supported, they don't feel connected. it's a miserable thing. It leads to sort of a Jack Black-like experience from School of Rock, and that is not ideal for the American educational system. So I've been playing with different models to kind of figure out, and partly I've thought about, could we do it through Playworks? Could it be sort of an adjunct to Playworks where we're working now on trying to figure out an exit strategy. So after we're in a school for a bunch of years, they don't want to ever let us go, but we would like to ultimately, because we're interested in systems change, we want to figure out how to build the school's capacity to keep it going. So I've wondered, could we create a position which was like a full-time, they would just hire a person who was maybe trained by Playworks, and we also are piloting right now an online credentialing program, so I have a dozen of my Northern California veteran staff are doing an online, see, I'm in favor of online education. They're doing an online credentialing and master's program in conjunction with the UOP. So I'm wondering, is there someone, could they get their credential through that, and then could they work at the school and do Playworks when they don't have a need for a sub, but they'd be a full-time person at the school, and then when a sub need came up, they'd be the first line of defense, and they would already have a relationship with the kids, and they'd already know the teachers, and they could be connected. And is there something in that? Or is there another way you could create a whole other alternative business where, I mean, the very idea of a substitute in some ways is a little insulting to classroom teachers, because the idea that someone could just sort of come in and jump in and substitute, it's not like being an understudy. You haven't been studying the lines, right? And so could you do, instead of a substitute, could you create something where they were coming in and they were doing like Playworks programming, or they were doing journalists, they could do journaling, or they could be doing mindfulness. How could you make it a substantive social emotional learning opportunity that sort of filled that gap, instead of trying to substitute it, but maximizing that vacancy? So anyway, if anybody wants to work on that, I don't have an extra time, but I totally am thrilled with the idea, and would love to have an intern or a group of students take it on and run with it, or you could just take it as your own. And if you just acknowledge me later when you're incredibly wealthy and successful from having done it as a for-profit, that would be great too. That was a little more visibility into how my brain works than probably many of you wanted, so I apologize for that. But anything else I can tell you about Playworks?
You were telling about the training program, but then you moved it.
Oh, right. Thank you. That's good memory. So training is very different from how we run the direct service model. So direct service, low-income urban schools, highly subsidized. Our training business is actually run not like a for-profit, but it fully covers its own costs. So there's no fundraising associated. And we use salespeople, account managers, who are calling and pursuing folks who've gotten grants or who have other funding, or cold leads and warm leads. And it's a lot of warm leads, because we basically took the training that we designed for our own staff, and we make it available all across the school, all across the country, for more affluent communities, for low-income schools where we don't have a full-time presence, rural communities, ex-urban communities, parochial schools, youth-serving organizations. And we have 3 different sort of units that we sell. One is the 1-day, and then we have a 3-day model, which we call a recess implementation, which really works with anybody associated with a school to make recess great. And then we have an ongoing sort of district-wide Recess 360. And what's interesting is it's been sort of, in terms of scaling, it's required us to develop a whole new capacity with the scaling the direct service model and opening all the different offices across the country. The essential skill was management, was managing people. Like, we have 600 employees. And so I mentioned earlier that I'd been sort of skeptical about the value of business school. When we first started to scale, we opened an office first in Baltimore and then DC and Boston. And it was really in that moment that it became clear that management was a real thing. That, like, people, I had been previously managing people, I thought, but because we were so small and intimate and everyone was close, basically all I had to do was stay out of the way and not mess things up too much. But once you had that level of size and distance, the importance, the emphasis on internal communication, and just the setting of expectations and the accountability frameworks and all the things that management really entails, and with all its complexity, really management was just one of many functional expertise that we really needed to build out. That before, when we'd been small and funky and local, we could get by with having a lot of really creative, wonderful, liberal arts educated, smart people who could figure out how to jerry-rig a computer system or sort of patch together an HR program or knew enough Excel to do a finance, a budget. But once you started to really scale, the pressure on the infrastructure and the need to have a real functional expertise in HR, finance, IT, all those things, and management really just became painfully evident. And we had a lot of turnover at that time, and there was a lot of unhappiness. And I actually ended up going to the board and saying, look, I'm a really great leader in some ways, and I'm a great fundraiser in a lot of ways, not a great manager. And we need to kind of come up with a different structure. And I will tell you, too, that I was inspired to go to my board and say that, partly because my current, one of my current board members is a person who has worked in the Valley for a long time, and she's a person that VCs bring in when they're about to go to IPO and they want to get the quirky but brilliant founder out of the way so that there's a stronger business proposition involved. And she and I just had this very funny conversation where she pointed out that I was that quirky but brilliant founder who needed to be getting out of the way so I didn't mess it up. And she was so great about it. And I think she was right. She said, look, I've met all sorts of founders, and they cared a lot about their idea, and they wanted the IPO to be successful and the stuff like that. I've never met anybody who cared more about scaling the idea than you did. And if, given how much more successful for-profits have been at scaling than nonprofits, it seems worthwhile to look at how they've done it and why. And so I was open to it because I thought she was probably right, that if we were going to scale effectively, we needed to bring in a full management team that was really effective. The training business, when we started launching that, after having sort of survived this scaling the direct service model, we realized that the function, the capacity, the skill internally that we really needed to cultivate was sales. We needed to really, we'd been doing sales to some, modified version for fundraising, but this was a really different kind of sales. This was like calling folks and really having account managers who were selling our training product across the country. And I got to tell you, that's not your father's nonprofit, right? That's not a internal capacity that's necessarily celebrated or even that comfortable for a lot of organizational cultures. And we were able to do it in a very playful way, and we were able to promote staff who'd started off with us as coaches to become salespeople and account managers. But it's been an interesting challenge. In this latest phase of where we are, the training business is really growing, but we're really focused now on the movement building piece, right? Because there's 60,000 public elementary schools out there, and the goal, again, isn't just to build the biggest possible Playworks, it's to really change the system. And so we recognize that the latest capacity that we really need to develop is around marketing. And so we've just brought on our first chief marketing officer, actually, a Stanford alum. Her name's Tanya Antonucci, and she's the former commissioner of the Women's Professional Soccer League in this country and played soccer here at Stanford. And she's a marketing person. She worked for Yahoo. She helped get their fantasy sports stuff going. And marketing is really different from communications. And helping us as an organization develop marketing capacity, again, somewhat uncharted waters for a nonprofit, but one that ultimately feels like if we're really going to change the system, learning from for-profits and what they know best about changing the conversation, that feels like an essential next step. Yeah.
So there are a lot of innovative endeavors in education now, operating sort of outside the traditional structure of the public education system. And some of them are organizing themselves as for-profit businesses, and some of them aren't. So you're an example of an organization that's gone the nonprofit route.
Yep.
And it sounds like you sort of have two business models within that, and one maybe would lend itself a little bit more to for-profit or not. But could you talk about the decision of matching the organizational form with the nature of the product, service, or market that you're getting into? Why it makes sense for you to be a nonprofit? Why does it make sense, if it does, for some of these innovators to be for-profit?
Yeah. Well, I ultimately think it's not necessarily so much the nature of the product or I think it's actually the end game. And for me, the end game is systemic change. And given my vantage point and all my biases, what interests me about public education is its role as a pillar of our democracy. And so, as such, being able to function as a nonprofit really gives us a latitude to bring on investors who are motivated and who seek a return that is motivated around this sort of shared values around systemic change as opposed to a more financial return. So for us, that was a really defining reality. We've talked about like peeling off parts or other opportunities for doing, like we do a corporate recess program where we work with corporations to generate income. But again, it has felt to us true to our values and who we are and how we choose to interact with the system to do it the way we do it. I do see lots of for-profits out there working, and frankly, textbook companies. Like it's not an innovative thing, really, on some level, right? There are groups that have always served the schools, and quite rightly are organized as for-profit businesses. So the spectrum of innovation relies on how you plug in and interact with the schools. It's a fascinating time too, like the politics of education reform being what they are. The questions about when people are talking about education reform, are they really talking about education reform, or are they talking about labor reform? And and then the reality too, I think with a certain amount of naivete, when I set out to start Playworks, I thought there was kind of one educational system that we were going to change. And increasingly, I'm just astounded by what a big country this is and how really there are all these different educational systems at work across regions, across sort of political persuasions, across, it's very different. And my experience, happily, is that the kids are very, very similar, but the grown-ups are very, very different. And you ignore the power of place at your own peril. I hope that answers it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you coming back down to save me? Come. Do you want to play one more game? How much time? Should we wrap up? Okay, so this game, are you guys feeling a little energetic? Are you willing to get up and move around? Okay, so the game is called Rochambeau Rockstar. And you can wait, don't say yes. See, the overachieving Stanford thing, it's shocking. All right, stop. So what's gonna happen, it's essentially a single elimination rock, paper, scissors tournament. But you can also think of it as a sort of performance art piece in which we sort of deconstruct the fleeting nature of leadership. Or not, right? Okay, so the way it's gonna work is, everybody know how to play rock, paper, scissors? So just to quickly, we go 1, 2, 3, show. And on show, you either throw out rock, paper, or scissors. And to review, rock crushes scissors, scissors cuts paper, and paper covers rock. And we don't do 2 out of 3, we just straight up. If you tie, you go again, but it's whoever wins, wins. The person who is the victor goes off in search of another victor to then play again. The vanquished player becomes part of the cheering section for the person who has just defeated you. And this is where you bring your own best self to like this experience. So, you can, if you're behind me and you're feeling kind of just, not like you fully have, you can just go Jill, Jill, Jill. But if you're feeling a little more like, wow, she really is so into it, go Jill, it's your birthday. You can just like whatever, you've just fully let your freak flag flow or whatever it's like. So just go for it, however you feel on that spectrum between Jill, Jill, Jill and the other. So then the person continues, I go off, I beat the next person. My cheering section is growing ever bigger, right? Whereas the number of victorious people is diminishing by half as we go. Does that make sense? So ultimately, we will come down, we'll have 2 remaining victors and 2 roughly even groups of folks cheering them on. And you should, be leading them on. Finally, one victor will emerge, that today's rock star. And you ask along the way what their name is, and then we will all cheer for them just in one final moment of glory. Okay? 2 thumbs up if we got it? So you are going to rise. Now is the standing time. Find a partner to do rock, paper, scissors. Ask their name. And begin. Here, I'll be yours. You got me. I'm Jill. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, here we go. I'm a ringer. Yeah, you follow me. Two. Okay, here we go.
Let's go.
Ready? I'm Jill.
I'm taking.
Ready? Yeah.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. Woo! All right, come on. Let's go. I shouldn't win, though. It looks bad. I know. I got it. Let's go that way. Here we go.
This way.
All right. Where's my cheering? Woo! There we go. All right. Okay, you got it. Come to me. Cheer her on. Ready? Thank you. There we go. Ready?
All right. Let's go, man.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. All right, yeah. What's your name? What's your name?
May.
Maya?
May.
May. Okay. May. Go May. Go May. Go May. Go May. Go May. May. Come on, bring it over here. May. Oh, right on. What's your name? Solana. Svetlana. Walk towards him. Here he's waving. Cheer him on. Svetlana. Woo! Go Svetlana. Woo! What's your name? Bora? Boris? Boris?
I didn't get it.
Boris?
This is our last one?
Yes. At the final round?
What's his name?
Oh, okay. All right. Boris. Is it Boris? Boris. Sorry. Premature. Do it with him. Wait. Shh. Boris. Oh, man. People. Boris! One more? Is there one more? Anybody else? Boris!